Our reading this morning is Psalm 62. My soul finds rest in God alone. My salvation comes from him. He alone is my rock and my salvation. He is my fortress. I shall never be shaken. How long will you assault a man? Would all of you throw him down, this leaning wall, this tottering fence? They fully intend to topple him from his lofty place. They take delight in lies. With their mouths they bless, but in their hearts they curse. Find rest, O my soul, in God alone. My hope comes from him. He alone is my rock and my salvation. He is my fortress. I shall not be shaken. My salvation and my honor depend on God. He is my mighty rock, my refuge. Trust in him at all times, O people. Pour out your hearts to him, for God is our refuge. Low-born men are but a breath. The high-born are but a lie. If weighed on a balance, they are nothing. Together they are only a breath. Do not trust in extortion or take pride in stolen goods, though your riches increase. Do not set your heart on them. One thing God has spoken, two things have I heard, that you, O God, are strong, and that you, O Lord, are loving. Surely you will reward each person according to what he has done. Amen.
Good morning, all. Nice to see you. So that psalm really is a personal help to me on many occasions, and I'm going to work a bit from it with you, if you don't mind, this morning. It's about the strength that David found in God at a time when he felt very vulnerable. It's normal to feel vulnerable, but I don't like it. Do you? No, not usually. Vulnerability is often confused with weakness. It's not the same thing. I don't have much personal strength, and one of the ways I know this is because I'm not very good at being vulnerable. A person who is strong can afford vulnerability, and I don't seem to be able to afford much of it. Perhaps you can, perhaps you can't. But vulnerability is a difficult feeling to have. And when we're criticized, we become very vulnerable. We're very vulnerable to criticism because of the ways in which we've experienced it in the past. Perhaps the roots of many of our anxieties when we're criticized maybe lie deep in our childhood. And maybe some of the criticisms that have particularly bitten deep have come from the people we most loved, most depended upon to affirm us, encourage us, and shape us and teach us. So being criticized is difficult. And for the last, in the January series this year of managing stuff, I felt led to look at the business of being criticized or suffering a put down or a discouragement, but very particularly being criticized. And just getting some hints that some are struggling to hear. Is the volume okay, or some of us finding it okay? Not so well. Okay. It's just I can see a few signals. Thank you, because if you don't give me the signals, I don't know, and we can't make the necessary adjustments. Thank you very much for that, Mark. I'd like to go to a time when Jesus was dealing with criticism. But the words that I'm going to begin with are those on the screen now from Proverbs chapter 12. This is a great proverb. Proverbs is like a toolkit for your life. You don't need all the Proverbs all at the same time. It depends on the job you're doing, on the situation you're facing, on the circumstances you're in, that you can dig into the book of Proverbs and find something that helps. But here's one that helps pretty much in all situations. Reckless words pierce like a sword. And you felt that, haven't you? You felt the sheer pain of words that jabbed into you. And sometimes the force of that injury is with you for a lifetime and is actually debilitating afterwards. But this proverb says a second thing, not just that reckless words pierce like a sword, but that the tongue of the wise brings healing. And who is wiser than God? And therefore, if this proverb holds, then God's words bring healing. And that is what this book is all about. In God's word, it brings healing. Which is why I mentioned a couple of weeks back that it's painful to see it used to afflict people, to reject people and make them feel discouraged. It pains me to see this book used in that way. So this is a book of encouragement and healing. It's got many different moods and many different aspects to it, but it's not in our hands in order to put anybody down. It is in our hands that people be recreated, that people be healed and restored and lifted up. And therefore, if you've ever been subject to criticism that has discouraged you and broken your spirit, as somebody waved a text from here at you, bear this in mind. None of God's word is there to destroy and hurt. It is there to heal and give life. So dismiss the stuff that is an abuse of the word and absorb the stuff that is true to it. Jesus was also criticized. And he told his disciples, actually, if I've been criticized, you're going to be criticized. If I'm persecuted, you're going to be persecuted. It goes with the territory. It's not possible to be a human being without being criticized, is it? There can't be anybody who's not being criticized. And there can't be anybody who hasn't criticized others. Right? It's a fact that goes on. Some of it is really destructive and bad. And some of it can be helpful, life-giving, and positive. So I'm going to encourage us to look at criticism as something that's a huge threat to us, and therefore something we'll need to protect ourselves against. We'll need some ways of doing that. And Psalm 62, I think, gives us the primary way. But also, we'll need to do some other stuff with criticism. Here's an instant when Jesus criticized those who were criticizing him. And I'd just like to read it to you. Jesus went on to say, "To what then can I compare the people of this generation? What are they like? They're like children sitting in the marketplace and calling out to each other, 'We played the pipe for you and you didn't dance. We sang a dirge and you didn't cry.' For John the Baptist came neither eating bread nor drinking wine, and you say, 'He has a demon.' The Son of Man came eating and drinking, and you say, 'He's a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners.' But wisdom is proved right by her children." It's a strange reading. You must have come across it before, I would think. People often say, "I haven't a clue what that's about." Let me suggest what I think it's about. Jesus has been criticized quite severely in recent times by the Pharisees, a group of religious believers that he was often in conflict with and who criticized him endlessly. And he criticized them too. And he's making a picture here of a marketplace scene of 2,000 years ago in any town or village in Palestine, where children are playing And some children want to play this way and some children want to play that way. It happens. Yeah? So what is spoken is, look, we played a happy tune for you. We sang a happy song, but you wouldn't dance. So we switched it to a dirge, but you wouldn't pretend to be at a funeral with us either. So how do we play with you? If we want to play a happy game with you, you won't play. If we choose a sad game, you won't play. How can we ever play together? And Jesus' point is this. Look, John the Baptist came and he was full of didn'ts. He didn't do this and he didn't do that. He didn't live a normal life. He denied himself constantly, all kinds of things. He didn't drink wine. He didn't eat the food that most people ate. He lived in the desert. He went without this. He went without that. He didn't do this thing. He didn't do that thing. Lots of didn't. You wouldn't listen to him. In fact, you thought he was eccentric, odd, or even demonic. I come along and I drink wine and I eat food like everybody else and I go to the same parties that other people go to and I do the same stuff, and you just call me a friend of drunkards, sinners and tax collectors. So really there's not going to be a way of pleasing you, is there? It doesn't matter what I do, you're going to criticize me. Have you ever felt like that yourself? Damned if you do and damned if you don't. It doesn't matter what I try. It's not going to be right, is it? That sort of feeling, yeah? Because sometimes they're just out to get you, aren't they? Yeah. Not always, but sometimes they are. And sometimes it's overwhelming. The book of Proverbs tells us that reckless words pierce like a sword. That's destructive of life. That is dangerous to life. That's a killing action. But the tongue of the wise brings healing. If the criticism you are receiving is intended to destroy, kindly ignore it. That's easier to say than to do, yes.
You said about toolbox.
Yes, I did.
Because my son-in-law got a toolbox.
He's got a toolbox, and he goes into his toolbox and he gets out the job he needs, yeah. Yeah. So he always selects the right tool, and that's how to work with the book of Proverbs. Read through it and see which are the ones that are going to fit for you. In fact, it's quite a good way to use the Bible anyway. Criticisms and put-downs and discouragements, but particularly criticism is in my focus. Criticisms come in two forms, I would suggest. This is all oversimplification. These are very complex things, really. Destructive and constructive. We talk about constructive criticism. Yeah? Usually I've found if somebody tells me, I'm going to offer you a constructive criticism, they're not. Right? Generally, that's an excuse for saying something pretty unpleasant. But sometimes it's true. Sometimes a person is just trying to say, you're not going to like this, Chris, but I think you need to hear it, and I hope it helps. And so forth. Constructive. Most criticism that you've given and received has been destructive in intent. Right? There's loads of it, isn't it? And most of the time you can recognize it. When David wrote the psalm, that we have a Psalm 62, or he borrowed it from somebody, however he got it, I don't know. But he talked about this wonderful image. He says, you're really out to get me, you guys. I feel like a leaning wall or a tottering fence. And you may have seen a leaning wall that may have been built strong and is actually a strong structure, but is only going to take a little push and over it's going to go. A wall that hasn't been maintained, or the land subsided, or something like that. I had a friend whose garage had a leaning wall, and the wind blew and the garage, stone built, fell. And sadly his car was still inside. And it was built strong, but it, for one reason or another and the passage of time and so forth, become vulnerable. And David says, that's how I feel. I feel like this leaning wall. I may have been strong at some point. I may be essentially strong, but right now, because you guys are out to get me, I feel vulnerable and likely to be tipped over at any point. Reject all attempts to push you over. Right? Don't do that. So if there is destructive criticism, you're best off not listening to it. It's very, very easy to say, very hard to do. We've all probably said to children, well, don't listen to them when they say that to you. Have you ever said that to a child? Or something like that? Just don't pay them any attention. Ignore them, and they'll leave you alone, or whatever. But of course, real life isn't like that. You ignore them, they still get at you, some of them, don't they? But it's hard to do, but I really want to recommend that you simply disqualify. Because you see, it matters whether you decide to let criticism in or not. And nobody can make that choice but you. And it may not be an easy choice to make, but there are times to go, do you know what? It's not touching me. Say what you want. I don't believe you're trying for my good. I don't believe this is helpful. So I'm actually not going to let it affect me. I'm just going to put a barrier in front between you and me, and I'm just not listening. I'm not allowing it to touch me. Don't allow destructive things to touch you. It's not going to help anybody or anything. We're vulnerable, and that's very easy to say, but I still think it's important for us to try and practice. And I've seen people who are quite good at that, who have learned to just dismiss and say, well, that's just rubbish. They're out to get me. This person just wants to pull me down. So why would I pay any attention to their criticism? Because they haven't said it because it's necessarily true. They haven't said it in order to help me be a better person. They're just out with the sword. And I'm just going to put a shield up and say, sorry, I'm not interested, not paying any mind to that. That is not going to be on my mind when I lie down in bed tonight. That is not going to be on my mind when I get up tomorrow morning. It's just not going to be on my mind, because until you choose to behave in a decent way, I won't be listening to what you have to say. Just not going to let it get under my skin. Disqualify it. See what, if you can do that, that's really helpful. It's not always so easy to do. If criticism is constructive, then the stuff you can do with it. If it's meant for your good, and I'll come back to that in just a moment, there's still something to do with it, which I've called it filtering on my slide, and that's how I think of it. You see, you bring a criticism against me, and I think, do you know what, Chris? She may be out to get me. She may just not like me very much. She may be upset by something I've said or done, or she may have just got out of bed the wrong side. I don't know what it is, but for some reason, yeah. But I do think she may have a point as well. I think maybe that is true about me in some way. So let me filter criticism and accept inside my thinking, my mind, my feelings, those things which I think, well, I think that bit might be true. Maybe not as true as she's saying, but I think it might have some truth that I should pay attention. So I'll let a little bit of it in. That which is going to help me improve, that can come in. But the rest, no, that's filtered out. I don't want to know. So consider the criticism when somebody's criticizing you. Consider, do I think this is fair? Do I think it's well motivated? Is this love at work in some way? Or is it something else? And does God have anything for me in it? So an important moment in King David's life, when his son led a rebellion and threw his dad off the throne of Judah in Jerusalem, of Israel at the time too. And King David had to retreat. He had to flee from his palace and retreat from the city. And there was a guy called Shimei who got up on a little hill nearby as David was leaving Jerusalem, fleeing from his son. And Shimei started throwing stones at David, and probably some other stuff too, and said, David, you just get out of here. I don't want you as our king. You're rubbish. You get out. And David's bodyguard, his closest bodyguard, his personal bodyguard, was right beside him. And he said, my lord, shall I go cut his head off? And instead of saying yes, which would have not been uncharacteristic perhaps for David, he said, no, don't. No, leave him. Let him throw his stones at me. Because I don't know yet, but maybe God has a word for me even in what this man is doing. Maybe there's something I need to learn from this. Well, David actually didn't remain in quite that state of wisdom and grace towards Shimei. Actually arranged his death later. But he decided to not act immediately, but to wait and say, I wonder if, even though this person is out to get me, even though this person is behaving badly towards me, there's no love at all, maybe there's a truth in there that I could still do with picking up that would be worth having. So filter, think about it, consider, but always affirm this that you know, and make sure you rehearse this often and get it more deeply embedded than any destructive word or criticism or put down or discouragement. Here it is in Psalm 62. My soul finds rest in God alone. My salvation comes from him. Doesn't come from those who are out to get me. My soul doesn't depend for its rest upon public approval or the agreement of my friends or the approval of my enemies. My salvation comes from God. God alone is my rock and my salvation, my fortress. I will never be shaken. You see, I'm a leaning wall, a tottering fence. So you can come at me and you might well have some success, but you cannot push God over, can you? So if I depend upon God's approval of me, not mine and not yours, I'm in an amazing place. Because God's message to me is, whatever they say, I love you, Chris. Whatever their attitude towards you, I affirm you as my child. I consider you worth dying for. I consider you worth having with me for eternity. I love you. So if somebody comes with an anti-creation message of destroying you, of wearing you down or belittling you or making you hurt or injured, no, they are wrong and that is sin, and here's the truth. I accept you. How you are now. You and I, there's work to be done on you. You're not perfect yet. We're going to be sorting that out. But I've forgiven you for whatever you may need for forgiveness, because I affirm my love for you. Now, when you want God's affirmation and God's approval, you've got it. And people are much less dependable. So the psalmist is saying, look guys, you may be about to push me over and I don't know if you're going to succeed or not, but I actually don't need your approval. I actually don't need the popularity. I actually don't need anybody's acceptance but God's, and you won't push him over. So he is like a fortress to me. He's my rock. He's my shield, my salvation. I will not be shaken, not because I'm strong, but because my God is strong. I will not be shaken. That's a great way to begin to manage criticism. Criticism will only pull you down when you allow it to. Now, we allow it to. But we need to recognize, well then, I'm allowing it too much strength in my life. I'm giving it currency I shouldn't give it. So choose your critics very well. I'll tell you who I choose for my critics. I always have, I have some conscious and unconsciously chosen critics. But in each of my areas of ministry, I've always identified my critics. I choose them. Here is somebody, when they've got a negative thing to say to me, I will always listen. And I also choose those to whom I won't listen to their criticisms in order to bring me down. Right? And here's the qualification to be one of my critics. Believe in me. Believe in me enough to want the best for me. Love me. Love me enough to believe that I am worth improving. Value what I am enough to go, because what you offer is so worth offering, I would like it to be the best that it can be, and it isn't always, so I'd like to help it be the best that it can be. Now you can be my critic if that's your attitude. I look for people like that, and when they talk, I really listen. Right? And I'm just telling you that's how I play it in my ministry. What I'm really saying to you is, this is how to deal with it in life. You appoint your critics. And if somebody's criticizing you who you have not appointed, then disregard their criticism. You appoint them. You decide, when she speaks, I'm going to listen to her because she's not out to get me. She's out to make me the best that I can be. She's on my side and she wants me to be better, and therefore she will criticize me. But it'll be worth hearing. Of course, life's more complex than all these things, but you see what I'm saying? Don't be frightened to make sure. Don't let people self-appoint as your critic. Okay? They haven't got the job because they've decided to have it. You give them the job. You decide who will criticize and whose criticisms you'll pay attention to. The rest, bin it. Forget it. More or less. Right? There is in the church a wonderful truth that we never criticize each other except in love. Do we? So the whole point, one of the whole points of church is that, as Paul told the Colossians, we can teach and admonish one another, which you can only do when you love one another and want each other to be the best that we can be. We appoint each other to be our critics then, because we can trust that nobody here is going to try and pull you down. They're only interested in your upbuilding and your completion and your joy and your fulfillment and so forth. I'm not quite speaking the truth, am I? Always watch out for the Christian who says to you something like this: Chris, I'm going to speak the truth to you in love. As soon as I hear those words, a shutter comes down in my mind. I think, no, you're not. And therefore I'm not going to listen. You are going to say something awkward to me, and you are pretending it's in love because you want me to pay attention. But there's no love here. And therefore I'm not paying attention. Occasionally somebody will use those words, and I know that they mean them, then I'll listen. Same principle. I appoint my own critics, thank you. You make sure you appoint yours, because they're the ones who are on your side and will work with God. I'm accepted by God. I may be a work in process. I definitely am. And I will need criticism. There's another instant in David's life that's really, really important. You may remember there was an occasion when David, when he was king, arranged for one of his army officers to go into battle. And then he had arranged that when the army officer led the troops into battle, that absolutely everybody else would suddenly pull back, and he'd be the only person on the battlefield who didn't know it was time to retreat. His death was certain. David murdered him. David murdered him because he fancied his wife, and in fact had already made his wife pregnant. And that was pretty appalling behavior one way or another. He counted on the guy's loyalty in battle to get him killed. It's a pretty mean kind of sin to do against somebody. Nathan was a prophet and came to see David. soon after that. Said to David, King, Lord, I've got a situation to report. David said, tell me. He said, well, there was this really rich guy, very rich. He had flocks of sheep and any number of lambs in the sheep flocks, loads of them. And one day a friend called by to stay the night, and this very rich man wanted to give him a nice meal. But instead of killing one of his own sheep, he went down the road to this poor guy whose whole family had one lamb. So important to their future was this lamb that even at night they took it into the house and he kept it warm with his own cloak and his body heat. So carefully did he look after this one lamb. And the rich man came and took that lamb and slaughtered it and gave it to his friend for a feast. David was incensed when he heard this. He said, tell me who this is, and I will see justice is done. Nathan said, King, O Lord, it's you. That's what you just did. You've got more wives than most of us can count. You've got extra women as well. You lack for nothing. If you want something, pretty much you can have it. This guy had one wife whom he loved, and you murdered him so that you could add her to your long list. And David was cut by this criticism. It changed him, I think, forever afterwards. He was deeply moved, and he realized he had gone so badly wrong. He repented of this horrible sin that he'd done and sought to find the right way to put things right. You can't really put that right, but it really affected him deeply. You see, that was good criticism. Because, okay, it was no fun for David, but somebody else, another family, was suffering because of David's behavior. And sometimes the church has to do this. Sometimes we have to do this. We have to criticize governments and policies because they're unfair to somebody. Criticism is not all wrong. It can be very constructive. It can be about the cause of love. But be very careful in how you do it. And be very careful about how you receive. Manage the business of criticism. Don't pierce others as with a sword, but speak wisely and heal. Occasionally, the road to healing leads through a painful place. Sometimes the criticism will need to hurt. Make sure you are responsible with that when you're handing it out to others. That the pain I'm about to cause will be worth it because greater good will come from it. As to receiving it, choose your own critics, appoint them, but then do listen to them. Dismiss those who are simply out to get you. Don't give their criticisms any particular standing. But do a bit of filtering, and if you see that there's some truth in it, receive it. Know for sure, and rehearse this every day, that you don't need anybody's approval except God's. And when you've got God's, you've got the approval that matters forever. Right? We want other people's approval, but it's God's that we need. My soul finds rest in God alone. My salvation comes from Him. He alone is my rock and my salvation, my fortress. I will never be shaken. Find rest, O my soul, in God alone. You can hear that the psalmist is having a conversation with himself. He's saying, my soul, you're feeling a bit upset today, aren't you? Because you're feeling vulnerable and put down. Well, start looking at God and stop looking at those who are pulling you down. Find rest, O my soul, in God alone, for my hope comes just from Him. He is my rock. He is my salvation. He is my fortress. I will not be shaken. My salvation and my honor depend on God, my mighty rock, my refuge. Trust in him at all times, O people. Pour out your hearts to him, for God is our refuge. And Lord God, our refuge, as I close, I pray for those who have shared so graciously in listening to my message today. I pray that the words of my mouth and the meditation of all our hearts will be pleasing and acceptable, that where what I have shared has stirred uncomfortable, painful or destructive memories, that you would rest your healing hand on my sister or brother in that need. I pray that all of us would be strengthened to know that you're on our side, even though we're not yet perfect. And there's so much yet to be improved in us. You believe in us, and we trust you. Build up our faith in you, our love for you, and our trust in who you are. Lord God, our rock, our salvation, our shield, our fortress. Thank you, Lord. Amen.